Hello, everyone, and welcome to GitHub Basics for Newcomers. This is a training tutorial and live demo intended for people who have never touched GitHub before and are not sure about what all the different pieces of the screens mean. I remember my own experience was being asked to do a set of activities in GitHub and having no idea what these concepts were, especially the term pull request. I was really confused by that. And so I'm happy to take everyone now through a set of steps, piece by piece by piece, so that you can have confidence in using GitHub in the future. The components of today's activity will be talking through a variety of concepts, doing live practice. And so I'd ask that you have your GitHub account open and ready to practice with me. And then I'll show you some reference materials. Also, to be clear, this is a live demonstration about Git and one of many tools that are available for working with GitHub. It's being recorded as a live demo for training purposes. It is not an endorsement of GitHub. Okay, here's our first concept. We'll first talk about Git. Git is the foundation of GitHub, and it's intended to solve the problem of when you have a hard time tracking all the different versions of a piece of work that's underway. Let's say that you have a document going on and you send it to 3 different people for comments. Getting all those comments back and combining all the edits can be really painful. What if you have a document and you're sending it around and people are making different edits, and then you might have the final copy and then someone notices some other edits, so you end up with the final copy or the final copy. All of this can end up being confusing, and you can end up where one project has many different files associated with it, and what's to be saved, keeping track of things, that can be pretty challenging. This is especially a big deal for developers, people that are writing computer code, and they want to be able to track what's happening with their projects. And so we have these tools that provide something called version control. It's kind of like Microsoft Word track changes, where you can keep track of an edit that someone made, or someone might suggest an edit that someone else can approve. Version control is there to enable multiple edits from multiple people, all to be tracked in one place. It's also super handy for being able to jump back in time. So let's say that you're working in Microsoft Word and you have a document that you've been making edits on. You won't really know every time you save where a past issue might have been, like where the typo came from. For a developer, it can be really important to figure out when did I introduce this bug into this code. So version control lets you jump back to all the past saved versions of something instead of just the current version that's being saved. So that's Git. It's a tool that mostly developers use for tracking versions of things and enabling us to use version control, kind of like Microsoft Office track changes. Any questions about that? Seeing no questions in the chat with the live participants, I'm going to keep on moving. So now we'll talk about GitHub. GitHub is a tool for using Git. It's used by many government agencies, and it enables all those edits from all those parties on a shared project to be tracked in one place. It is the platform for the rest of the concepts today, and I'll show you an example of what a GitHub page might look like. So GitHub is available in a dark version and a light version. We're going to be spending our time in the light version, but you can use whichever background is preferable for you. And I want to note here, this is a really busy page. Whenever you visit most pages on GitHub, there's just a lot of stuff going on. You can see there's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of things that look kind of like code with these numbers that are over here, and just a lot of pieces of information, and that can be overwhelming, especially if you're using GitHub for the first time. So I want to say that's okay. The purpose of this training is to demystify all the content that you're seeing here on this busy page, or if you use a dark version, a page like this, so that you have a sense of what these different pieces mean and what you can be doing as you use GitHub. Okay, so let's start first by talking about orgs. Orgs and your personal profile are the thing that will be right after github.com. So we're going to be tracking a lot of the things that we talk about today, where they kind of fall in the website address that you're using. So for example, we have github.com/GSA. And that you can see here is a org that has many different things kind of under it. It has all these different projects you see here. There's a whole list of them, and you can even like sort them by type and which ones are open and which ones aren't. This is GSA's org. We also have an org here for the Office of Management and Budget, and it has some other projects that are all listed. You can see github.com/EOP-OMB for this, and github.com/GSA. So if you want to know where you are in GitHub, the first thing after github.com is usually going to be that org. You can say, okay, I'm sitting under the GSA area, just like you see GSA at the top left here and EOP-OMB here. This also applies if you're looking at your own profile on GitHub. So this is my GitHub profile, and now you can see W/ right after github.com, and I have my own stuff that all falls out of here. So this is the first concept in GitHub, orgs or your personal profile. Any questions? Okay, we'll keep moving. Next, we're going to talk about repos or repositories. So remember how I talked about how Git enables version control. And when you're using, Microsoft Office track changes, or you're tracking changes in a Google Doc or anywhere else like that, that's all usually happening in like one file, in one, presentation, in one document, in one spreadsheet, whatever it might be. The neat thing about GitHub or Git's version control is that you can apply it to a whole set of files that are all in a shared folder. So a repo is just a fancy word for a folder that has one set of version control tracking all its files that you see on GitHub, and they sit under an org or under a personal account. So we're going to look at these images you see at the bottom here. Let me click on this link. And now if we're looking at, and I'll make the window a little bit smaller for this purpose. So here is, hit view code. You can see all the different components under this GSA/Digitalgov-PRA. So the repo is the thing that's right after the org. So the org is GSA, the repo is Digitalgov-PRA. You can see that on the github.com page as well. And then down here, you can see this is one big folder, and it has a bunch of folders in it. It has underscore data, includes, JS, layouts, pages, plugins. And if I look over here, you'll see exactly the same thing, either in kind of this display where it's an icon, or this display in a list. The stuff that's here that you might see in like a local folder on your computer, it mirrors what you'll see on github.com with the kind of same stuff that's listed out here. The only exception are these things with dots in front of them, which you can see on github.com, but may not be themselves tracked. So this is the major point we want to make here, is that this stuff you see over here is the same thing. It's just as if you were looking inside a folder on your computer. It's just that this folder is sitting on the GitHub website. Any questions about this? I see someone typing, so we'll wait for 1 second for a question. When do you need to create a repo? That is an awesome question. So a repo would be something that you would create to run, a new project or a new kind of set of things that you want to track. Maybe you'll have a piece of an existing project has gotten so big that you want to run it somewhere else. Maybe there's something involving technology and you want to have some technical tools being deployed with one repo that you don't use with another one. For the purposes of the folks that are in this training, I think you're usually not going to be deciding to make your own repos immediately. You'll be using other people's. And something I've heard before is that it can be kind of scary to interact with something on GitHub and you're worried that you're going to mess something up. So we're also going to be practicing making our own repos and our own profiles a little bit later, so you can learn about some of the tools and tricks. But a very often way that you could equate the two is to say a repo equates to a website. So this, for example, Digitalgov-PRA, it equates to the website pra.digital.gov. So this is like the underlying stuff that feeds that website. Another question, how would you compare or contrast GitHub with repos to something like, an online cloud service that has folders? Like if you're, looking at something on iCloud or Google Drive or any one of those services. That's a great question. Those things enable you to kind of track the live version of something. They don't necessarily track all the versions in quite the same way, but they do. But many of the files have their own kind of individual histories, but it can be a little bit harder to kind of do some of the kind of combined edits and give people a separate space to review a combined edit. We'll talk about some of those concepts in a little bit. So I would say when you're using one of those services, it's like a directory that enables you to kind of jump at all the individual files. In GitHub and with Git, you can do test changes that affect many files at the same time. So let's say that, for example, I'm a developer and I want to make a change to the backend code of a website, or I want to make a changes to many different pages on a website at once. And I'm not a developer. I'm someone that writes website content. If I wanted to do those things, I could make all those edits and stage them together with GitHub. And we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. Okay, here is the next thing that we'll talk about, a commit. So a commit is essentially like doing a save. It's saying I'm going to save a new version of the site, and it's different than what you might have when you save a document or save a spreadsheet, and that Git will remember the specific edits that you made in that specific moment. So let's go back to that typo fix that we were looking at beforehand. So this is the live version of that. And I'm going to now talk through all the different pieces that this means. This green line is what's added. So we added the word to in this line, and we got rid of the line beforehand, which had this typo that was missing. So enable more businesses do is not grammatical. It was enable more businesses to do. You can see that this was a commit made on January 5th, 2017. It was in this place called main, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then there's this number by it, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment too. The commits have these IDs with them that you usually won't have to worry about, but you see this 5D718CF. All that means is it's the first little piece of the identifier. So 5D718CF you can see up here. It's the same thing as what's down here. And now that we're in this screen and looking at how busy it is, I want to again orient you to where we are. We're in the 18F, 18F org. We're in the 18f.gsa.gov repo. So github.com/18f/18f.gsa.gov. And then we're looking at a commit. And then there's this long identifier for the commit. So usually wherever you are in GitHub, if you get a little bit confused or lost, you can look at this, the URL, the web address, and you'll be able to know exactly where you are. So that is what a commit looks like. And then as you can see from when I did this training in 2017, you can add a comment if you wanted to add a comment on a specific commit. That's possible. Commits also have parents. It's the version that immediately preceded it. So a commit is the next step in saving, and it kind of follows on the save before it, follows on the save before it. And those parents, you could click on that link and see what that looks like as well. Another thing you can do is you can just view the file. If you click on these three dots in the top right, you can always view the entire file at that point of it being saved. So this is what the whole file looks like. You can see it's a big old blog post that's here. And that enables you to see what did this whole file look like at the moment that this commit was made. That sometimes is a useful tool. Any questions about commits? I'm seeing a question, so I'll wait for it. Can you revert back to previous commits or delete commits? Yes. It's usually not a great idea to delete a commit unless someone saved something that was secret that they probably shouldn't have saved, like, a key for using a cloud tool or something like that. But it's definitely possible to revert. And we'll talk more about that process later when we talk about saving. I also should point out, GitHub tracks the number of deletions and deletes. So you can see there's a green and a red here. That means we added a line and we deleted a line. And this too reflects the number of files changed. You can also click this button to expand the rest of the file up and see above the commit, and this button over here to see the lines that were after the commit. And then all these numbers on the left side reflect the line numbers that are being edited. So you might have a change on 91 or a change on 106. Is there a limit on how many commits you can make? Absolutely not. And we will see that there are many, 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 many commits that exist. on this repo that we're in. I don't know if there's a way to easily count it. Yeah, there have been 8,328 commits that were made. And you can see there's a whole list of them all shown here about all the different commits that have been happening on 18f.gsa.gov. We'll talk more about what these things mean as we get to the rest of the comments. One more question. If you make a lot of changes to a document, will they all show up on the commit page? It depends on, every time you commit, it's like you're saving all the changes that you made. So we haven't actually made any changes yet, but when you do that, you'll save all the changes at once. So you might be editing, 10 lines at once. But yes, they will all show up on the commit page or the history page for that file. Let's now talk about branches. Branches are where you work inside a repo. For people working on the project to, do their own versions of a project without kind of affecting the main version of the project. It's like a little sandbox that you can make. So the repo might have the main branch that everyone is using, where everyone is working, but then you can make your own branch somewhere else and then try to make an edit and see how that works out. So the equation I want to make is, imagine that the org is like a street and the repo is a piece of property on the street. And it might have like a house on it. Well, you can set up a branch, which is just like another copy of a house on the same property, to see what happens if you totally were to change the kitchen or totally change the living room or change a piece of furniture or change the color of the house, any of those things. You can just make an identical copy of the house, put it right behind the other one, and then try out making your changes there. That's what a branch is. When we look at it on the main page here, this is the branch. And you can see there's many, many other branches that all exist here that we can look at. Some of them will be pretty old. This one is probably from like March, just looking at the date. And you can see main had 227 commits that got ahead of it. So it reflected some change that probably got put into the main branch, and now main has gotten kind of far ahead. Let's go back to that commit that we were looking at before. I want to jump back to that commit. You can see here that this commit was in the main branch. You can see that little icon of the kind of the splitting off little circles. That means that we're in the main branch. And so when you're in the main branch, you don't kind of see anything about the branch that you're in the URL up here. But if we were to change branches, let's do that one more time. Now you'll see it says I'm in /tree/ and then the name of the branch that's up here. So that's how you know that you're in not the live version. And something that can happen in GitHub is, let's say I'm clicking around in one of these pages and I want to open up this page. If I'm in a branch, it'll kind of show it up here. So sometimes I might need to jump back to main to see the live version of what that looks like. In this case, they're the exact same, because the last commit that happened on this page was 3 years ago. But you might have to jump back and forth between different branches depending on where you are. But the branch is always going to be shown in the top left here. And then you can see where you are up here in the URL by listing which branch you're in. What questions do people have about branches? I'll just show you while that question's coming in. Here's a list of all the branches that this particular repo has. You can see some are default, some are active, some are a little bit old. And that's normal to see in different repos. Is it always necessary to make a branch for something even minor like a typo? What's the etiquette? We were going to talk about that later. That is a great question. But yes, when you're looking at branches, you don't have to experiment with the furniture in another branch. Maybe you want to just fix the typo and just go straight into the kind of the main house and then mess with the furniture there. You can absolutely do that. Different repos have different norms that you should follow. So it depends on how things work for your particular org. Some orgs will say no one makes a change on the main branch without it being checked. That especially is important with computer code, where just a little edit can cause a big bug. Can you archive branches? Yes, you absolutely can. So if I look over here at branches, There are many that are stale, but there's also a lot of branches that are, I would say delete is probably the term, and we'll talk about deleting branches a little bit later. So it's less archive and more when a branch isn't needed anymore, you can get rid of it because maybe the thing that it had, the change, has already been pulled into the main branch. Okay, let's talk now about forks. Forks are just like branches, but they live in someone else's space. So remember how I said that if the org was like a street and the repo was like a property on the street, well, a fork lives on a totally different street somewhere, but it enables you to take, if there's a public version of the code for something that sits on GitHub, you can totally make your own version of it and then change it in your own space. So I'll show you an example of that. I have here my copy of 18f.gsa.gov that I forked. So you can see instead of being at 18f/18f.gsa.gov, like here, now it's w//18f.gsa.gov. So we have all the same branches that are here. We have, it's kind of clearly linked back to what the source was, but this is on my profile. It has no effect on the main version, but it enables me to look at, try experimenting with, make some edits to that, any kind of one of those things that you want to do. You can always fork those into your own environment. And the way to do a fork is you just go up here and you press fork. Fork your own copy of 18f/18f.gsa.gov. It's just a button that you can click. And then there's a way to create a new fork. So I've already done that over here. You can see that I've actually put a commit onto that where I removed a link that didn't work in an old blog post. It's hard to see it in here, but it's like this link right there is no longer a live link. So I did that replacement. So my branch now, or my fork now has a change that isn't represented in the 18f kind of main version of the repo. So I've essentially taken that house, I've built my own, and I made a little bit of an edit, and maybe I want to send that back. But the fork, to be clear, is just like mine. And you can tell that it's sitting somewhere in a different place because when we look at it, the URL has w//18f.gsa.gov instead of over here, 18f/18f.gsa.gov. Or in the top here, 18f/18f.gsa.gov, and over here, the top looks a little bit different. So forks and branches, basically the same thing, but a fork sits under a whole different org as well. So it would be normal if, let's say that I wanted to have my own copy of a repo, I could very easily fork that, make a new branch in the fork, and then maybe I have a change I want to send back that way. What questions do people have about forks? Seeing none, we're going to keep on going. Pull request. This is by far the most confusing thing that I did not understand when I first started using GitHub. So we have the ingredients now to kind of get, what do these words mean? Pull and request. So it starts with, you have a separate branch or fork with your change. And I already showed you how, hold on, let me go back over here. I showed you how I made a commit on my fork. So we're going to go back to that one commit. And then I maybe now want to pull that commit into the main version of the repo 18f.gsa.gov, or the 18f repo. So you can see I have my own repo is over here. It's w//18f.gsa.gov. I want to pull a change over into 18f/18f.gsa.gov. So I have a commit. A pull request is a request that says, can you please take the commits that are over here and pull them over into the main branch? So it is a request for someone else to pull. When that happens, it's called a merge. And so you might open a pull request and say, I want all the changes that are happening in my new feature branch to get pulled into the main branch. And you can keep on editing new feature branch until it's ready to go. And then all the changes will get pulled over. So let's talk about what one of those pull requests might look like. Here's an example pull request. So this was a pull request that was fixing an issue, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it's from this person who works at GSA, and they had 4 commits that they added. And then you can see someone else said, oh, I have some requested changes that I might want to make. And they said, could you please, remove this from the footer, make these changes, etc., and add a few notes of what they wanted. And then someone else said, this all looks good, and here's some other things that I appreciate. And then the author of the pull request over here added made another commit. That's what this thing is. You see this little ID over here. This stands for a commit that they did to fix that. We'll click on that in a second. So here's their little follow-up edits that they made, along with a comment that came from one of the folks. They then added their own note about it. That person made a few other comments saying, okay, well, there's one more thing to fix about this, but otherwise said this looks good. Those final fixes were made, and then it was merged. And so this commit was merged into the main branch. And you can see that down here, then, the TLC footer order branch was deleted 2 days ago. So this screen, again, has a lot of things going on. Let's break down all the different pieces. There are 6 commits involved in this pull request. You can see a list of them all here with their little identifiers, and we can click on any of those to view the commit details. So here see the specific commit that was made, which files were changed, what was done. You can see which files were changed. This is the best place to usually look in a pull request to see all the different changes kind of all together from all the commits. So here were the edits that were made. And then if you're a reviewer, you can actually hit this review button and then type in what you think about the pull request. In this case, the pull request is already merged and I'm not a reviewer, so I don't really have the buttons here, but this is where people go to set those reviews that I showed you a second ago. So that's a pull request. It is requesting to merge, in this case, it was 6 commits from the TLC footer order branch into the main branch last week. And you can see this one has a status of merged. And for every repo, if you go up to the main repo, you can see all the pull requests, both the open ones and the closed ones. And it'll show you all the different pull requests. Sometimes pull requests may not be merged. Sometimes they are merged. This kind of shows you the results of what happened with them. Sometimes things that were in one pull request make sense to include in a different pull request. Anything can happen, but that's what the pull request section is. And sometimes you'll have pull requests that you're tagged on. And then one other thing I wanted to show you about that pull request, if we go back over here, you can assign reviewers and assignees of people to follow up on it. So in this case, this person asked for a review from these 2 folks. And you can see that down here, they provided their comments further down in the pull request. So I just went through a bunch of content about the pull request. What questions do people have? Mostly, I want this screen to be a little bit less intimidating than it might have been the first time you're looking at it. Now that you know, okay, you know what a commit is, you know how the commits are being moved. Seeing some questions coming in, so we'll wait one moment for those. Who wrote the summary? What info should be in it? So this is there's kind of a template that this repo uses for a pull request summary when making a change to the 18f.gsa.gov website. So they had, here's a note about what it does. Here's some checklist things to do to make sure that things are working. Like if you need to do something that affects the documentation, updating the README, or ensuring design review. Every org might have its own format for doing these things. There's not one specific guide as to what should be in it. And then another question was, does every org have their own protocol on who should be reviewers and how many to have and who makes the final call to merge? Yes. For a small repo, you might have a situation where there's only a few people and they're getting reviews from each other. For repos that you manage yourself, like my own personal website, I might do a pull request to keep track of my changes, but I'm approving my own stuff. So you can have those kind of self-approvals as well. There's not one magic answer. I would say generally, we want pull requests to be reviewed by some other person because it always helps us to have just another pair of eyes to quickly look at something. And the pull request is kind of that place that you can do that kind of quality control check, if that makes sense. So yeah, everything might have their own protocol with that. And so the thing we're going to try doing, and we're going to do it live, is we're going to open a pull request right now for this link that I had that no longer works. So here you can see, here is the template that this org has. It has a request for a summary. What does the pull request do? Removes a link no longer working. It does not close an issue, which we haven't talked about yet. I didn't make an issue about that. And then I don't need to update the README. It's not a front-end change. And I'm from the outside, so I don't really have an ability to affect these automated checks. But it says I can create the pull request. So I'm going to hit that button, create pull request. And now you can see that there's a pull request that I've made live. And if you want in the future to go to this URL, you will be able to see this pull request and whatever's happened to it in the future. You can see there's one commit in it, one file changed, and then I have the notes about the pull request summary of removing a link no longer working. So we'll see what happens with that, but that pull request has been created. I want to show it's not that hard to make it, but I don't have the ability to merge it. It's not for me to be able to do that. Someone else has to do that piece. All I can do is kind of provide the suggestion. What questions do people have? Any others about pull requests? All right, let's keep going. Oh, I see a possible question. I'll also point out while that's happening, you can see most pull requests at the top. They might have, if I look at this recent kind of closed one. So they just kind of have main and then the name of the name of the other branch. For me, because I have two different orgs, it has that 18F : main and then W/: main. So it's representing both the org and the repo here. What are the checks? The checks are automated things that work differently in every repo that really do not affect someone that is, if you're kind of hitting GitHub as a beginner, it's not something that you necessarily need to worry about, but it's a set of automatic processes, maybe to make sure that if you're making a code change, the code change is kind of passing the formatting requirements for code in that repo. Or if you're making a change to a website, that the website still works. You might have an automatic check to make sure you haven't broken something in the website. Those are all kind of back-end pieces that can happen. If we look at the pull request that we looked at a moment ago, we can see some of these checks. So here's a check, and this was a service called Circle CI checked and just made sure that the service still built, and it said success. So there was a check for this that was done automatically. I, as someone from the outside, can't initiate a check the way that someone inside might be. You can also see that these checks are kind of shown here. Did something build successfully? If it didn't, then it would maybe have a little X here, and that would be a warning to have something to get fixed. Okay, next up, we have issues. Issues are just conversations. They are existing kind of in a separate bubble from all the different things we've talked about in terms of editing files and branches and commits. It's a discussion board. It's where, for a public issue page, people can file ideas or comments. So let's look at an example issue here, for example. So this might be an issue that says, I would expect all the blog posts to have the same content width. So we'd expect all blog posts to look like this, but then some blog posts it looks like were really, really thin. You see how there's a difference here. And so this person said, I would have expected this. Instead, I saw that. And then here's how to reproduce it. And then people on the team said, okay, I think this is a bug. And they added some labels. Someone said, I want to help with this issue. And noted that the column grows if you add text to a header tag. There was more conversation about it. And then there's a pull request. You see this pull request here? Dan Brady mentioned this issue on April 30th. Force blog container to be full width. Fixes 3666. This is issue 3666. So the pull request ties back to the issue. When you put in this number here, closes 3666, that just pings back to the issue and says, I was able to fix it. They talk about how they fixed it. And then you can close the issue as completed because of a pull request that was done in 3679. So that's how these two things kind of tie together. You can see this pull request has a number, the issue has a number, and they kind of work together to track and fix the edits that were made here. So that is an example issue. Now I have an example issues page for all of you to go to that are watching. And this includes everyone in the recording and everyone here in the live class. You can see someone has already done one or did one from looking at a past version of the class that existed, actually. So you can go to this page right now, github.com/18f/hour-of-code/issues, and you can make an issue. And we'll practice that in a moment with the whole group. But this is an available place where you can see there are generations of people that have been making test issues to try them out for class purposes. So this is your place that you can also do the same. We'll do that together in a moment. Let's also talk, well, we'll jump to that in a moment. Any other questions about issues before I move on to Markdown? We'll just look at this past example of an issue. You can see this person, Lauren, and then my colleague Aiden and I were both just giving kind of comments back. And this is what you can do on an issue. It's just it's a little discussion place. All right, Markdown. You'll sometimes see that files in GitHub have these .mds at the end. So not like a .doc for a document or .text for a text file or .xls for a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. .md means it's in Markdown. And that means that text can be easily websiteified. It can be converted to HTML. And you can use the preview button in GitHub to see if your Markdown it displays the way you expect. We have this whole set of tools for showing you how things can look together. So I'm going to close some of these windows and say, okay, so if you want to make something in a heading, you might put it by this. If you want to make a list, you might have, stars or dashes. This formatting on the left shows you what Markdown produces on the right. And when you're doing this in GitHub, let's go back to Hour of Code together. There we go. If I wanted to make a new issue here, and all of you can open up an issue yourself right now if you want to try it, you can type something. And really helpfully, the issue screen has a little formatting window here. So you can highlight something and say, I want it to be bold. And then you have these two asterisks that show up on each side, or this should be in italics. If you highlight that, it's two underlines on each side that make something into italics, or this is a link. And if I wanted to put a link up, I would put brackets on that side, and then in parentheses, the link to the website that we might want to go to. //18f.gsa.gov. And that's a link. Or GitHub can help you with that if you say, and then highlight this, click on the little link button. There you go. It just says where you should put the website address. So this is all made very easy. And I hope that all of you right now are going to this same website and going to try to create an issue. You can, there's all these other buttons. You can use it to reference a pull request or to mention another user or add a tag list. You can make lists if you want to say this is a list. Number 2, you can highlight these and you can see it shows up with a 1 and 2. You press this preview button and this shows you what it'll look like live. There's our bold, there's our italics, there's our link, here's our list. But I can't submit it yet because I need to have a title. This is my issue for class. Any questions before people try submitting their own issues? All right, so I'm going to press submit new issue, and I'm betting and hoping that there'll be a few more issues that show up here, but maybe not immediately. So here's now my issue. You can see there's my bold, my italics, my link, and then I can even add a little emoji to myself, like a rocket or something. This feature did not exist the last time I did this training. And then if I want, let's say I noticed a typo and I wanted to edit my issue, I can go up here and hit the 3 dots at the top right, click on edit, and then say, here is an edit. And then I can press update comment. And there's my edit there. When you do an edit, you can also see what that preview looks like. So I wanted to type in just a bunch of nonsense there. Could do that. And then if you wanted to add an image, you can just drag an image and just drop it in here, or paste an image in. You can copy an image and paste it in, and it'll show up just like in that other issue we pointed out that had those pictures. You can do that. Any questions about making issues? Hey, there's an issue. Thank you for people in the class that are making these test issues. Exactly. How do I ask someone to review and approve my edit? So that would be back in the pull requests. And so if I look back over here at the pull request, you can, I don't have the ability to ask for reviewers because I'm making the suggestion from the outside. But if we go back to our example pull request over here, there we go. You can see that you can ask for reviewers, and this is where the people are, and they'll get a little ping in GitHub to go and review something. So this is how the pull request review feature works. And then when you're pinged here, then you can add, they'll add their little note of if they approve it or don't approve it, and then you can merge the pull request. Look at that. Look at all the issues that are coming in. And likewise, I hope for everyone watching this as a recording, you can see that people have been on their own time adding issues in these classes live and not live. You can do the same thing. And if we notice it, we'll be able to say, congratulations, and close it. I like the "is this thing on" issue that someone made in August 2018. All right. Let's now talk about projects. So you can, issues are sometimes a way that you can keep track of work or things that need to happen or bugs to keep track of. But what if you wanted to have an easier way to track all those issues? Well, GitHub has a way to do that. That is called these projects. So we'll first look at a project that sits under a repo. So this would maybe be digital.gov/content. So you can see this is in the GSA org in the digitalgov.gov repo. And then here's a project, and they have a bunch of issues here. Number 1702, number 485. And you can see there's different categories of the issues, some things that are published, some things that are published later, some things in production. Likewise, the Digitalgov platform, it has its own set of things in terms of backlog, in progress, in review, done, merged. And all these are either issues or pull requests. And you can click into any of them from here. It'll show you, here's what the past issue was. So it's a very easy way to have a bunch of issues all together. And you can see if I go to the digital.gov.gov main page, I can just click on projects and then look at the list of projects. And these projects are actually in the projects classic screen. So you have to do this little drop down here to get there. There's two different types of projects, and this can be pretty tricky. Sometimes projects live under a repo, just like this. Sometimes they live under a whole org. So now I'm in the GSA org. I'm not in a specific repo, and I still see that there are 6 projects here. So these projects span across multiple repos. So let's look, for example, at the data.gov team board here. You'll see that there are issues in the data.gov repo. But if I go down here, there's an issue in the inventory app repo as well, number 636. So all these issues sit in one project, but they are all tracked in kind of one board that might exist. And that is pretty handy if you want to be tracking lots of different pieces of work. So again, here we have no status, backlog, new dev, sprint backlog, and progress bot. Everyone might set up their projects differently, but these are essentially just big old list of issues that exist across projects or exist across repos. And you can see that these sit, because it involves multiple repos, this project sits under the entire org of GSA, not under any specific repo. Any questions about projects? All right. And then finally, I think the last concept here is wikis. A repo on GitHub might have a wiki for documentation, but documentation can also be in those README files that we'll see. So let's look at an example of this, for example, in the data.gov repo. You can see up here, we have code, issues, pull requests, actions. We said we'd skip that. And then we have wiki. And so the wiki has a bunch of different pages, and it talks about how data.gov works and the back end of it, if you want to understand any of those pieces. So it has a bunch of its own pages, and you can click into them or link to them that are set up. But this is all stuff about the repo, and the repo's code sits over here under code. You can also have documentation in these READMEs. And the README, for any folder in GitHub, if it has a readme.md, that .md means Markdown, that will automatically display below here. So here is the README for data.gov. You can see there's a bunch of stuff about checks that are passing or failing, but there's not a lot of content here. They have it mostly all sitting in the wiki. And we talked before about if you wanted to fork it, here's how you'd fork it. You can also watch it if you want to be notified of changes, or hit the star button if you want to give it a star. And then you can keep track of your repos that have stars. Any questions about the wikis? Some repos don't have any wikis. So if you don't see something up here, it just doesn't exist, and it's totally fine. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of the little pieces up here is insights. So this lets you see various facts about a given repo. So let's look back at data.gov here. And if I press on insights, then I can see things like how many issues are active, how many pull requests. But the one that I think is most fun is the contributors. So this is live data about where and when all the different people that have worked on this have been working. It takes a little bit for GitHub to produce it for us. So you'll also need to wait for this. This is all just kind of fun information to see. It's not something you necessarily need for work. And while that's loading, let me also work on this one. And GitHub may need a moment. Usually it doesn't take this long. There we go. Okay, so you can see here, we have these different folks. They've been adding lines and removing lines. And here's the different people that have worked on data.gov over time. And then likewise, if I skip over here, you'll see 18f.gsa.gov has its list as well. But you can see a lot of different people have been making contributions in the history of this data.gov repo. Okay, we have now made it through all the concepts. So I'm going to click through real quick the creating an issue steps. But for folks that are here live, if you have any questions about any of those concepts or things that I missed, this is a great chance to ask them. So again, just recapping how we created the issue. You'll go to, for example, the hour of code repo. You'll click the issues tab in the top. You'll click on new issue. You'll put in your title. You'll put in any text you want to write. You'll look at that preview, that button if you need to, look at what the formatting might look like. You'll press submit, and then you have an issue. And you can edit that issue by pressing the three dots in the top right, hitting edit, and then you're able to update a comment. Any other questions, folks? Or give me a thumbs up if it all makes sense. All right, seeing some thumbs up. Awesome. Now we're going to practice creating our own repo with the last 10 minutes that we have here. So for this step, we're going to go back into GitHub, and I'm going to go to my main profile. So you can do this at your profile screen, or you can just, I have this button up here I can click that says new. If I go to my repos, that's what I need to do. Then you see there's this new screen, but you can just go to this as well by doing github.com/new. So create a new repository. So now for everyone watching the recording and everyone here live, we're all going to do this together. github.com/new. We're all going to try out doing our own pull request. So for this, there's a bunch of different things that you can click. I'm going to do this with you right now. So for the owner, I'm going to choose my own personal profile. That's probably all that you can choose. And I'm just going to call it will-test. that's available. I can say, this is a repo for testing GitHub activities. I'll say it's public. I'm going to add a README file. I'm not going to use a get it nor template because that is something that's out of the scope of this training. And I'll give it the MIT license because that's pretty simple. And because I'm okay with anyone else using stuff that I make in this, but you, of course, don't need to release any copyright on the things that you create. And then I'll press this create repository button. Anyone have questions about this screen before we press the green button? All right, we're pressing it. So now GitHub has made me a repo. And this is just, and for you as well, a repo. Because I clicked that README button, I have this README available here. And there's a license because I gave it the MIT license. So now I want to make an edit on my own repo. So I'm going to click on the README, and I can get into there, but just by clicking the title README. You can see that there's one commit here, which is the creation of it. I can also edit the README just by pressing this little pencil icon in the top right. So there's lots of ways to get to editing something. GitHub in general has many different buttons you can click to do any given activity. So I'm just going to click on this pencil in the top right to edit the README. And now you can see I have a place to edit the README. It's a little bit less helpful than the issue screen where you have that bold and italics and link button that you can press, but it's all the same rules here, and we're going to have a preview. So now I'm going to add something to my README to test for a pull request. And I'm going to say, I want repo to be in bold. So I'm going to put the 2 stars on each side. And it helpfully kind of showed it in bold format there. And I'm going to, this is a numbered list. I'll just put a number 1 in front of that and then say, oh, that's helpful. Look at that. It put the little 2 in for me. Second numbered list. And if I press preview, it'll show you what the new version of this looks like. And I can press this little show diff button in the top right, and it'll show you here's what you've changed. In yellow is what you've changed. In green is what you've added. If I was to totally delete this, and I press the preview show diff, then it would have this little red pink icon behind it. So it's really helpful in showing you here's all the different edits that you're making. I'll add that back just by hitting undo. Sometimes you need to change the wrap on this so that you can get everything to show up if it's going way off to the right. And let's say that I'm happy with this. I've added 2 lines and I've changed a line. Maybe, and then this is the title. You can see how it shows up really big. That's because I have a title. If I wanted to have a smaller title, this is a smaller title. It ends up showing up like that. So I'm happy with all these pieces. I now want to save this. The save button or the commit button is in the top right. So I'll press commit changes. And now I have this screen of what do I want to call my commit? And I'll say update readme.md. That looks good. Sure, I can take that. Or I can say first commit to try a pull request. And I can say, this is where you'd say, added some lines, made some things bold. You might make this really specific depending on the work that you're doing. Experimented with formatting. And I can, because this is my repo and I can do what I want, I can commit directly to the main branch. But usually what you're going to do is you're going to ask it to create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. So you'll click this other radio button down here, and I'll say, first pull, this is the name of the branch. So I'm just going to say first PR for first pull request. And I usually try to describe the branch with what I'm doing in a branch. So if you're making a typo fix, you'd call it wslack-typo fix or whatever. I'll press this propose change button. And then here is the screen to get my pull request set up. And now that question earlier about how I get a reviewer, this is where you could select a review, except I don't have any reviewers that sit in my profile. And I don't think I can pick me. No, it's not going to let me do that. So you type in someone else that you work with, a colleague, and could select a reviewer here. You could select an assignee of someone that needs to look at it. You can give it a label. The default labels are bugs, documentation, duplicate, invalid, question, etc. You could say it's associated with the project if I had a project in my home profile for this repo I just made, but I don't. So all this is where all that kind of stuff is set. And then the line I already put in the commit is just added here by default. I could change it if I want to and say, this is my first pull request. And I can even add a little emoji for a rocket. So I'll do that there. You can look at the preview to make sure that looks like the way I expect. I can press create pull request. What does this arrow do? You can make it as called a draft pull request and say it's not ready for review yet, but I'll just make it a standard pull request. And then ta-da, I've made a pull request. And I could have rules if I wanted to make sure someone else looked at it before merging. I haven't set up any kind of actions or any kind of automatic checks. So I have the ability to merge my own thing. Usually you'll see that this button's grayed out until someone else gives it an approval. But because this is my own space and I can't approve my own stuff, you can see I went over to files changed and then review changes and then tried to hit approve. I can't do this. This is what someone else might do. But I can leave a comment. This is what a comment looks like. I can submit that as a review. Now, if I go back to the main thing, it says, there's this, and then here's a comment. So one other fun thing you can do in a pull request is you could say, I want to make a fix to this little bit right here. So I click this little, the little plus by this line. I could even select multiple lines and press a plus on both of them. When I do that, you see this little thing that says add a suggestion. And if you have a different kind of resolution here, you can see that add a suggestion button's on the far, it's kind of in the middle instead of the far left. If I press add a suggestion, it shows you both of these lines that are here. And I could say, this is a suggestion. And you can suggest a change and hit add single comment. And what that will do in the main pull request is it will then show a comment with a suggested change that says, here, you should add this. And then it's really easy for the original author of a pull request to hit commit changes, and then that suggestion has been applied. You do all those things, you press merge, confirm merge, and then I'll delete my branch because I don't need it anymore because I pulled the commit that I made from one place to the other. And now if we go back to my new repo and my code, here's all the changes that are made. And now I have 4 commits that are here. The initial change, the update to the change, and then merging the pull request. So this was the suggestion, this was the merge, and this was the first commit. And that is the end of our GitHub Basics training. I have a bunch of steps all shown here. If you want to follow this on your own, the PowerPoint will be available for you to click through yourself. If you want to see the different steps that we followed for making a pull request, making a repo. And at the end here, I have some resources for you. An introduction to GitHub from the Digitalgov training page, a blog post about how GitHub and other open source tools are used in government, and an introduction if you want to see how TTS, the organization, uses GitHub. And with that, thank you so much for joining. I hope you can go to the Hour of Code website and make your own issue with any thoughts that you have. And otherwise, thank you so much for joining.